Welcome back, bro. Episode 2 is basically the whole men need less, minds need more thesis. We went from men's loneliness and phone addiction to meditation as impulse training and then hit purpose versus ambition. But the part that keeps buzzing is this claim: we don't need relationships anymore. That sounds half true, half propaganda for gurus, you know? Because humans can survive alone, sure, but can they thrive alone? That's the real question. His argument was wild, though. Your body can be healthy without others, but your mind can't. I mean, I've watched people survive alone for years and then snap in the weirdest ways. Like the loneliness doesn't kill you fast, it just corrosion engineers your attention. And attention is basically the battery life of your brain, right? Exactly. And then meditation gets framed as train the controller, not stop thinking forever. The candle thing, fixed point gazing, sounds so simple I immediately distrust it. But the logic is actually coherent. Learn to resist impulses, then learn to focus one thing. He even differentiates technique versus state. Like focusing is a step, but consciousness is the outcome. You can't do dying, you have to induce the environment. That part hit me. Still, I worry people hear states and start role-playing enlightenment. True, but he also made it practical. ADHD people shouldn't be told to sit still. They should be told to run their attention. That cafeteria sound challenge is hilarious and genius at the same time. Listen to 10 sounds in 3 seconds. That's like speed training your brain's focus muscles. Which is exactly why most people fail meditation. They're using the wrong exercise. Okay, but where I push it back internally, can one technique really cover 1,000 personalities? Like, yes, cognitive fingerprints and all that, but humans are annoyingly inconsistent. Still, his broader addiction model is the cleanest part. Addiction is pleasure plus pain relief. He keeps saying addictions soothe the nervous system, dopamine surge, and negative emotional circuitry suppression. That framing makes phone addiction and porn addiction feel less moral and more functional. Like the brain is basically going, bro, this hack turns down my suffering volume. And then meditation becomes the alternative emotional regulation skill set, not just a vibe. But I'm going to ask the annoying question. What if someone's pain is real trauma, not just cravings? He did answer it. If the trauma stays unmetabolized, the craving keeps returning. So therapy plus emotion processing plus meditation, rather than meditation only as a miracle cure. That's more honest than most one weird trick content. I also liked the part about shame spirals. Shame shows up, porn shows up, then shame grows. It's like shame is the notification sound and porn is the app you compulsively open. The upward spiral he described, vent, cry, process emotion, sounds simple, but it's not easy. And it requires trust, which means relationships again. Full circle, right? Exactly, because even his opening claim about men and relationships decay keeps haunting me. Like, sure, you can order groceries alone, but can you regulate emotions alone without an audience of some kind? Your brain still wants friction, feedback, mirroring, otherwise it just stews. Which ties into his purpose versus ambition distinction. Are those really opposites? Ambition is like achieve. Purpose is like why you're alive while achieving. But purpose and ambition can overlap too. People act without purpose and they still become machines. True, but he was arguing porn addiction correlates with meaninglessness, not merely low ambition. And that's why his suggestion feels more behavioral than preachy. Build a life worth living. That also makes me think, success as painkiller is basically another addiction category. Like people chase success the way a kid chases sugar, until the sugar stops working. Then your identity collapses, because it was never trained to tolerate pain. Which is why his "don't chase success to avoid failure" pain line was kind of brutal. He basically says, if you want pain-free writing, don't write. That's the contract. And that makes the 25% rule land too. Shrink the goal so your brain doesn't interpret it as failure. Cut the goal in half, then half again. Tiny wins keep motivation alive long enough to build momentum. I get it, but I also worry about people using tiny goals as an excuse to never stretch. Same, but the one step at a time framing fixes it. Stretch through action, not fantasies. And the best part was the humility. He says the job is controlling attention, learning your mind, not pretending you're above weakness. Also, the no rock bottom, just lowest point before movement thing, chef's kiss for addicts and everyone else. Because it shifts responsibility back without shaming people, help them want to change, don't do the work for them. That extra mile is the mile too far point was super practical. Let them have skin in the game. Not paying for therapy is terrifying, though, until you see it actually reduces learned helplessness. And then you realize the intervention isn't money. It's non-judgmental connection and emotional literacy. Which brings us back to the Men Crisis headline. Maybe the real crisis is untrained attention and missing intimacy. Technology can supply dopamine, but it can't supply meaning or the mind's ability to tolerate pain. So the Evolve Society prescription is basically teach regulation, teach relationship skills, and teach purpose. Last question line, if you had one page, was basically, I'm sorry I didn't teach you sooner, and I love you anyway. That hit harder than any science metaphor, honestly. All right, wrap time. Episode 2 ends with one takeaway. Plug in the controller and don't unplug from people. Thanks for hanging with us across this 2-episode run. Catch you next time. Welcome back. Episode 2 basically wrestled with how attention, addiction, and intimacy connect. We ended on meditation as a controller knob and the need for non-judgmental relationships. Honestly, the craziest part wasn't the neuroscience. It was the confidence behind it. Like, he kept saying most people fail because they have a crappy teacher. I love that idea, but I'm also like, doesn't that risk blaming the student forever? True, but he wasn't saying you're hopeless. He was saying match the technique to the mind. And the Trataka fixed point gazing thing sounds like something monks would weaponize. Blink less, suffer more, become enlightened. Sounds like a startup pitch. Though I will say, if your brain can't stop impulses, starting with eyes and stillness is clever. The bigger claim was, meditation is first resisting impulses, then training single-point focus. And then the state stuff, dhyana, then beyond, he made it feel less mystical, more structured. Still, whenever anyone starts naming Sanskrit states, my skepticism wakes up like a cat. But the analogy to sleep was actually good. One is something you do, the other happens to you. That's the part I kept thinking about. You can't force awareness like you force a button. It connects to the Men Crisis thread too, because if attention is unmanaged, intimacy decays. Right. He basically argued modern life removed survival necessity, so relationships become optional and weaker. And then the brain still wants connection, but it replaces it with substitutes. Porn, AI, dopamine loops. We don't need each other anymore is such a confident sentence from someone who definitely does need people. Like even the body, your mind's the only organ that refuses to work solo. That was the key. The mind requires another mind to stay healthy, even if you can survive physically alone. I liked how he reframed meditation as training the frontal lobes, so addictions have less leverage. But meditation conquers them all is bold. My brain wants to say, okay, what about severe cases? He did hedge, not all, but he still argued the mechanism is consistent across addictions. The two-part definition, addiction equals pleasure plus avoidance of pain, so you train both sides. That's actually a clean lens because social media and heroin both start with feel better now. And porn in particular, he argued the real draw is shutting off negative emotion, not even the pleasure. He gave that brutal example of porn on one screen while work happens on another, so it becomes emotional regulation backstage. My conspiracy brain immediately wanted data, but my human brain said, yeah, that checks out. What I really wrestled with was the purpose versus ambition distinction. Because he basically said ambition isn't a cure for emptiness, and those two get conflated constantly. I partially agree, but I also think ambition can create purpose over time. Sure, but he was warning against using success as the emotional anesthetic, chasing wins to avoid pain. That's such a clean diagnosis for like half the internet, honestly. And then he tied it back to phone addiction. Attention grabs you, but meaning still eludes you. It's not that screens are evil. It's that they replace the slow work of emotional tolerance. That's why his tolerate pain point hit. He made sadness temporary, not identity. Which is easier said than done when your ego treats every event like a verdict. Then we got into shame and the upward spiral. Talk, vent, metabolize emotion, find the root. I appreciated that he didn't moralize. Shame gets addressed by compassionate emotional processing. Also, his first conversation rule was a whole vibe. Connect non-judgmentally, don't bully the person. And his take on rehab, forced change doesn't stick unless the person wants it. This is where people get frustrated, because they must want it sounds unfair. But I think the deeper point was you can't cure someone's addiction with your willpower. The don't do the extra mile thing, help without creating helplessness, felt painfully accurate. Like the roommate and dishes analogy. If you take responsibility, the other person does less. That's a relationship lesson too, not just a therapy lesson. Boundaries create growth. And motivational interviewing. Ambivalence means if you push, they pull back automatically. That sounds like every family group chat ever, honestly. You tell me to do the gym, I suddenly need a philosophy degree first. The 25% rule was also interesting. Cut the goal down until motivation doesn't collapse. But is that just optimization for dopamine? What about long-term vision? The rebuttal was, focus on today's action, not the podium. Otherwise, the brain treats effort as failure. That circles back to the controller unplug analogy. If you don't plug in, you live on autopilot. The one page of truth ending was basically the emotional spine. Apology, love, and teaching your kids what matters. And the sutra idea, Glisha and Vasana, coloring and impressions driving experience. I love the text no reply example because it dismantles the external explanation reflex. Your mind turns silence into a prophecy, then you suffer like it's evidence. So the last message to the world and family was, love plus teaching, even while acknowledging mortality. And you could feel the emotion underneath, like he wasn't just talking theory. The past life discussion was intense, but even if you disagree, the emotional validity still landed. I kept thinking, whether or not it's literal, meditation can surface buried grief and transform how we relate to it. So our disagreement quota for today is, I'm not fully buying the mechanism on past lives, but I buy the therapeutic effect. Exactly, because the immediate takeaway is practical. Train attention, tolerate pain, and don't unplug from people. All right, wrap time. Episode 2 ends with one takeaway. Plug in the controller and don't unplug from people. Thanks for hanging with us across this 2-episode run. Catch you next time. Welcome back. Episode 2 was basically mind training meets addiction therapy. We went from why relationships decay to why attention is the actual control knob. The strongest line for me was the brain can't be healthy alone. And it's wild because tech sells no need as the dream. I get the point, but we no longer need each other feels exaggerated. Still, the loneliness math is real when everything becomes optional and remote. Like you can order groceries without talking to a single human. Congrats, you optimized survival and accidentally destroyed connection. Then he goes, the only organ that requires another human is the mind. That sounds philosophical until you realize it's basically social regulation theory. But okay, I'm team relationships matter, yes. The part that actually lit up my brain was the meditation explanation. Simple, almost gym-like. He defines meditation as controlling attention, which instantly makes it testable. Like, if you can't control attention, your impulses just drive the car. And he frames addiction as a pleasure source plus pain avoidance. Pleasure plus turn off the uncomfortable feeling is the real cheat code, huh? I'll push back. Addiction is more than that. Habits, cues, identity too. But even if it's not the whole diagram, it's a damn useful sketch. His argument was that meditation strengthens frontal control so impulses don't win instantly. I liked the no-impulse surfing framing, like training the brake muscle. The candle Tritaka bit sounded extreme until he said it's safe and practical. Fixed-point gazing always feels like a trap, like burn your eyes, good luck. But yeah, in the way that gym instructors say hurt but don't damage. Then the kid game, Sniffer Gobbler, was genius because it disguises self-control as play. If you can get a 4-year-old to hold still, the adult excuses get demolished. That avoid impulses and distractions, then focus one thing part is the skeleton of it. He also made a 3-layer distinction, focusing technique, then a state, then samadhi. The terminology might be mystical, but the sequence is basically train attention, then enter a calmer mode. And the you can't force the state line was important, same as sleep. Go-to-sleep instructions always sound dumb because you can't command the process. Meditation as create conditions instead of achieve outcomes is actually more honest. And then he links it to addictions. Suddenly it's not just spiritual wellness, it's behavioral training. He basically said, your brain is looking for dopamine and emotional shutdown, so train both systems. The dopamine part is like the engine, and pain tolerance is the steering wheel. I do wonder if people reduce it to just meditate and ignore trauma work. He addressed that. Sometimes addiction drives are metabolized only when the root pain is treated. That also connects back to relationships, because pain regulation is social too. If you don't have relational scaffolding, you'll rent substitutes, porn, screens, endless scrolling. And substitutes are great, until they become the entire emotional infrastructure. He even said porn works by shutting off negative emotions, not because it's pleasurable. That framing actually helped me think about my own tech habits. What emotion am I avoiding? And shame as the spiral was real. Shame visits, then you reach for the antidote that worsens life. I didn't expect him to bring Freud into it, but the venting then lightning concept makes sense. Like cry first, then reason. Humans are weird like that. Also, his advice to friends and family was surprisingly pragmatic. Don't be a bystander, but don't do everything. He used the extra mile is a mile too far idea, help just enough to activate agency. If you pay for everything, you train them to outsource responsibility. And his skin in the game observation, people show up more when they're invested, doesn't surprise me. Though I'm wary of turning motivation into a billing strategy, but the point is agency. The motivational interviewing bit was neat. Ambivalence means if you push, they push back. It's like talking to your own brain. Give it a shove and it rebels for sport. That ambivalence also shows up with goals. He warned about big goals killing today's momentum. The 25% rule was basically shrink the target so your brain stops calling it insufficient. Your brain sees $10 work as nowhere near $10,000, so it tanks motivation. That's painfully relatable. The motivation circuitry is so petty sometimes. And then we circled back to the relationship premise. Purpose, ambition, and the mind's coloring of reality. The ego compares so it hurts framing, Glisha and Vasana, was interesting. I love when he explains ego like it's a filter on your whole experience. Like texting someone and not getting a reply, your mind manufactures a story fast. I still think the story can sometimes be directionally right, but the certainty is usually the problem. So the takeaway becomes, before you act, investigate what your mind is adding. And then that one page of truth answer, love plus teaching before mortality, hit harder than the tech bashing. Because it ties the whole episode together. Relationship is the container. Attention is the tool. Also, the past life debate still cracks me up in a good way. Emotion landed even if mechanism didn't. Even if you doubt the literal past, grief surfacing in meditation is therapeutic anyway. So for me, the practical creed is plug in the controller and don't unplug from people. All right, wrap time. Episode 2 ends with one takeaway. Train attention, tolerate pain, stay connected. Thanks for hanging with us across this 2-episode run. Catch you next time. Welcome back, Malik here. This is the final episode, episode 2. We basically stitched together relationships, meditation, addiction, and the mind's attention control knob. The big through line was, you don't need tech less, you need attention more. And the one page of truth idea, like distill everything down, felt oddly practical. Because everyone's chasing a 10-year plan and he's like, bro, just handle today. I like the 25% rule, but I'm still suspicious of anything that sounds too clean. Still, the motivation circuitry story makes sense. Your brain hates seeing tiny progress. So the trick is shrinking the goal so your brain can't call it not moving. That connects back to addiction too, right? Small wins, repeated training. And meditation framed as plug in your controller is such a good metaphor. Like my character on screen would absolutely destroy my life without that controller. The whole front lobes as self-control weights was unexpectedly funny and brutal. Wait though, if meditation is controlling attention, why does the guy talk about states like samadhi? I mean, I'm open-minded, but I don't need mystical language to justify training attention. But even if you strip the mystical part, the training model still works. He literally said, not real meditation, like Tritaka candle staring and stop blinking for 10 seconds. And then your eyes water and you think, oh no, am I dying? But it's safe. That's such a perfect way to teach impulse restraint. Your impulse is blink. What I loved is step 1. Ignore impulses. Step 2. Focus on one sensation. Like he compared distraction avoidance versus pushing attention somewhere specific. That difference matters, because don't think is basically a marketing slogan. And then the ADHD cafeteria sound game telling your mind to run, not sit. That's the first time meditation advice ever sounded like it was designed for humans, not monks. But he also claimed 112 techniques and one will work naturally for every person. I don't know if it's exactly 112, but the principle, find your cognitive fingerprint, works. That's also why the relationship part hit. Humans aren't self-sufficient brains. The line that only the mind needs another human is a wild claim, but the spirit of it is true. Like heart can do its thing alone, but your mind is out here starving for mental contact. And when you remove necessity, like ordering everything, no social friction, relationships decay. I kept thinking, we created survival without people, so we're confused why connection feels optional. And then technology sells replacement intimacy like AI girlfriends, pornography, and doom scrolling. He went hard on women no longer needing men, men no longer needing women, too sweeping for me. But the underlying point, independence as a trap when it kills interdependence, lands. The real enemy seems to be attention captured by loops that don't require real reciprocity, which is why his definition of addiction was so sharp, pleasure plus antidote to pain. That's the neat pivot. Addiction isn't just craving pleasure, it's avoidance of negative emotion. And porn was described less as sex dopamine and more as turn off the emotions in my amygdala. Him saying people have porn on one screen while working on another, that imagery is nightmare fuel. But again, the fix he proposes is consistent. Strengthen resistance and build emotional regulation alternatives. He even tied shame into the cycle. Shame spikes, then the person uses the coping behavior. And then the vent and metabolize thing, let the emotion move through you instead of freezing it. The Freud jab was funny, but the therapy mechanic, express emotion, reduce intensity, feels credible. The past life and epigenetic memory talk, I'm still not buying the literal story. But I agree with the practical outcome. Meditation can surface grief, and that can be healing. Like even if who remembers what is uncertain, the psyche doesn't care about our certainty. And that connects to how you deal with addiction too. Don't demand certainty, create readiness. Motivational interviewing, ambivalence, and don't push them. That sounded like the emotional version of training attention. Because if you push, the brain counterpulls. It's like training wheels made of resistance. So the first conversation rule, non-judgment, compassion, let them want to stop, was huge. He basically said you can't cure an addiction for someone else. You can only approach correctly. And the don't go the extra mile, a mile too far line? Chef's kiss, relatable. It's that tricky balance. Help enough to start, but not so much that they stop acting. The dish in the sink example was so simple it hurt. Take responsibility, the roommate does less. I also liked his data-ish observation. When people have skin in the game, they show up. Though 70% free practice needs context, but the behavioral idea is strong. The meta-theme is accountability plus compassion. Push but don't shove. Reward effort. Tolerate pain. And the pain tolerance part tied to relationships again. You choose connection, even knowing you might lose it. That's the emotionally honest twist. Love opens you to grief and still you attach. Which makes the one page of truth ending feel less like a prompt and more like a vow. One page, 20 sutras, Glisha and Vasana, beliefs coloring reality and the latent desires driving behavior. My mind is basically an author adding footnotes to every event, then acting shocked by the conclusion. That's why he keeps circling back. Investigate what your mind is adding before you act. And honestly, that's advice you can use on your worst day, not just during calm meditation hours. If there's one thing I'm taking, it's train attention, tolerate pain, stay connected. Plug in the controller, especially when your brain begs you to unplug from people. All right, that's it for episode 2. Thanks for hanging with us across this 2-episode run. Catch you next time. and go be kind to your attention today. Welcome back. Episode 2 is the finale, and we went deep on attention, addiction, and why relationships matter. We unpacked how meditation is really impulse control training, not think-nothing cosplay. And we circled back to the big claim: the mind can't be healthy alone. The men crisis angle felt spicy, but the underlying mechanism wasn't dumb. Removing necessity from relationships makes people fragile, not free. You can survive without each other is such a villain origin story. Like society is evolving, but the human brain didn't update its firmware. I'm with the brain needs other brains part, but the leap to society will evolve feels optimistic. Still, the prescription was clear. Prioritize relationships even when you technically don't need them. That line hit: the mind is the only organ that requires another human to stay healthy. It's such a bold framing, but honestly it explains a lot of today's loneliness. We also went from lonely men to addiction psychiatrist real fast, which I loved. The transition was basically panic about men, then talk about porn like a systems problem. His definition of addiction was surprisingly clean: pleasure plus pain dampening. So it's not just seeking dopamine, it's escaping discomfort. And that matches what people do with phones too. Scrolling is mood management. We call it entertainment so we don't feel like we're numbing out emotions. The best part was the sequencing. Wanting leads to wanting control, and meditation trains control. The way he framed meditation as impulse resistance was way more grounded than empty your thoughts. But wait, Tritaka and don't blink sounds like torture disguised as wellness. He was like, you'll water, it's fine, like that's a normal wellness disclaimer. The trick is you're training the impulse to shift attention, not magically becoming a monk overnight. I actually like the kid game example, Sniffer Gobbler, because it's literally behavioral training for self-control. And then the second step, attention on one internal sensation, chance, vibration, and staying anchored. So the meditation basics were: restrain impulses, then learn to stay on one thing without fleeing. That's basically, attention is a muscle, but with better vocabulary and fewer gym metaphors. The gym metaphor is still there, though. Lift weights for self-control. What confused a lot of people, according to him, was that English lumps everything into one word: meditation. He split it into focusing techniques versus states, like doing versus having. I'm always slightly allergic to stages of consciousness talk, but the sleep analogy was good. Sleep is something you set up, not something you command, so meditation can be the same. And then he went full DH, then Dhyan, then Samadhi, which is where my rational brain tried to take a nap. But even if you ignore the Sanskrit, the core is train attention first. Then he attacked the my brain is too busy excuse like it was a bad teacher problem. I liked that he said there are many meditation techniques. One fits your cognitive fingerprint. 112 techniques, one will work, sounds like marketing, but his ADHD approach was compelling. He basically told ADHD patients, don't slow down, run the mind, fast listen to sounds. And that ends with mental fatigue leading to stillness. Very practical. Then it loops back to addiction. Weaker frontal control equals easier relapse. The frontal lobe strengthening claim, whether or not we love it exactly, fits the lived experience. When you're more able to pause, every addiction's pitch gets worse. That's the whole scam exposed. Pause before you press buy or open second screen. And he emphasized pain tolerance. Sadness for a while beats shutting everything off forever. Which is why the shame spiral in porn addiction is so nasty. Shame brings more avoidance. He described upward spirals as venting, metabolizing the emotion, and building a life worth living. I'll push slightly. For some people, shame is the fuel, but for others, it's depression fuel. But overall, the teach emotional regulation alternatives message was consistent. Then the relationship angle reappeared through motivational interviewing, ambivalence, resistance, and not pushing. Humans resist being rescued. They want agency, not coercion. That first conversation must be open point felt applicable way beyond addictions. If you talk to someone judgmentally, you don't get truth, you get performance. And his don't do the extra mile rule, help enough to invite responsibility, not replace it it's basically, don't steal their chances to choose the hard thing. Also, that 70% free practice anecdote was wild. Skin in the game matters. I like the 25% rule too. Big goals tank motivation because the brain compares effort to the finish line. So your motivation gets murdered by your own imagination. Classic. Cut the goal down, focus on today's step, and progress stops feeling like failure. That connected back to the relationship and tech theme. Don't outsource your purpose to external dopamine. Like if your phone becomes your plan, you'll never build the attention skills that make real life workable. You end up goalless but tired, which is the worst brand of busy. And then the episode landed with Glisha and Vasana, how your mind colors reality before you experience it. You're a loser hurts, or doesn't hurt depending on interpretation, so your mind is the author again. That's the whole control knob. Train attention, tolerate pain, and choose connection anyway. Plug in, stay present, and stop letting technology replace the relationship your brain needs. All right, that's it for episode 2. Thanks for hanging with us across this 2-episode run. Catch you next time, and go be kind to your attention today. Welcome back, and yeah, this one is the final stretch, episode 2. We went deep on why relationships decay when survival stops needing people, and how meditation trains attention. Also, we basically said your mind is coloring the whole experience, not reality itself. That control knob line is staying in my head all day, man. I love the vibe, but I want to push on the meditation cures addictions claim. Not every addiction is the same mechanism, right? Some are trauma-driven, some are learned habits. True, but the argument wasn't magic, it was train impulses and regulate pain differently. Which is, honestly, a pretty fair pitch for most addictions, even if it's not 100%. And I liked how it tied pleasure plus pain avoidance into one model. Because if addiction is basically, I get relief, then meditation is like, cool, feel it and don't bolt. The part about cravings at 11 p.m., that hit home too hard. The brain goes, you deserve the dopamine, and your frontal lobes are like, prove it. So when he says meditation strengthens the areas that resist impulses, I'm like, yeah, that's plausible. But then you have to admit, most people try to meditate like it's think of nothing, right? That's the funniest mistake. No wonder people fail and call themselves broken. And he's like, no, your mind wandering isn't failure, it's just the training ground. I also liked the right technique argument. ADHD kids shouldn't be told to be statues. Go run to the playground first. Yeah, that maps perfectly. The candle-fixed gaze practice sounded intense, though. Who's out here staring at fire like it's a hobby? Apparently people tear up and then it lubricates, so it's like medically awkward eye-watering? I'm not saying I'm signing up for candle tears, but I get the mechanism. Then the chest vibration chant thing, turn attention into a single handle for your mind. That part felt practical. Attention is trainable, not mystical only. And then he went full Sanskrit architecture, dharana, dhyana, samadhi. I'll be honest, those labels can feel like marketing for states of mind. But the sleep analogy was actually good. Technique versus state, you create the conditions. That's the piece most people skip. You can't force the state. You can only set up the environment. And once you accept that, your failures change from I'm bad to I need better instructions. Which is how he kept dunking on apps. Your teacher isn't your software. You have a crappy surgeon problem. I mean, that metaphor was brutal. The one of 112 techniques will fit everyone also sounds like confidence mixed with responsibility. I loved how he made meditation feel like fitness. Different workouts for different bodies. Because if you treat it like a single tradition, then yeah, you'll tell the wrong people to keep trying. Also, can we talk about the relationships opening? That was the scary thesis. We no longer need each other for survival, and therefore relationships decay. Ouch. That's why he brought in the idea, brain health needs another human mind, not just organs. And it tied back to tech. When you remove necessity, you remove the glue. But then tech also supplies fake glue. AI, girlfriends, porn, instant shopping, delivery everything. Fleshlight, if you want to, is such a chaotic example, but the point lands. Real connection isn't only pleasure, it's co-regulation, perspective, and meaning. And the episode basically dared us to prioritize relationships even when we don't need them. That's such a counterintuitive ask, because comfort makes you think you're self-sufficient. Then the psychology comes in, shame, ambivalence, and how you approach people without pushing them off balance. Motivational interviewing was another stop forcing, start listening moment. And I actually liked the "you can't cure someone else" reminder, especially when we think we're being helpful. The part about not paying for therapy felt harsh at first, but the skin in the game logic is real. The fear is we do more than they do less. Classic unintended consequence. And the 25% rule for goals. Don't set a goal so big it crushes motivation today. It reframes ambition as tiny enough to start, not big enough to impress your future self. So the whole thing becomes one message: train attention, reduce avoidance, and choose connection. Like, the brain's control knob is attention, and relationships are the environment that makes it workable. All right, that's the final word from us. Thanks for riding through this 2-episode run with us. Catch you next time, and go be kind to your attention today. Seriously, start small.